I will try to do this seated, so I'm not in the way of the slides. So thank you. I'm so delighted to be here today. I'm speaking from an organization called Ithaka SNR, which I'll say a couple of words about, and then really I'm looking forward to announce the upcoming publication of a major project that a colleague and I have been working on for the last 2 to 3 years. So. Just a couple of words about our organization for those it may not be familiar. Ithaka is a not-for-profit organization based in the United States that exists basically to help academia use digital technologies in new and innovative and sustainable ways. We have 3 services. Some of you may be familiar with one or more of them. I'll start from the bottom up. Portico is our digital preservation service. It's focused on making sure that e-journals and e-books and other kinds of digital and digitized content is preserved for the long term. JSTOR, some of you may be familiar with JSTOR. It's a research platform for scholarship. It contains something approaching 1,500 journals and increasingly other kinds of content types that faculty and students and others use for research and scholarship and teaching and learning. And then finally, Ithaka SNR is our strategy and research service. I'm affiliated with Ithaka SNR, and we're basically focused on both client consulting projects as well as public research projects that help academia understand better how the digital transformation is affecting us all. Just to give you a sense of some of the kinds of things that we've done, on the left column is sort of a thematic area, and then an associated project is listed on the right. So we've done work to try to understand user needs, practices, and attitudes of faculty members, students, librarians, and others who can help us to better understand what kinds of services should be developed and provided. We've done work on sustainability of digital resources. You'll see a little bit of that kind of thinking sprinkled in my talk. We've done work on scholarly publishing, on the role of the library, the academic library in particular, and then finally teaching and learning with technology, which is of course what I'm here to talk about today. So here's just a little bit of background about the project that I'm here to speak about. So we looked at the teaching and learning community several years ago, and we were looking at the sort of landscape for courseware and saying what kind of value could, if any, could our organization add. There were a number of open courseware projects that were fairly mature, even as of several years ago, and we thought that a major study looking at them generally could yield some valuable results for the community, a sort of comparative study. But we noticed that there was a lot of when you tried to understand what was going on with courseware, most of the literature was actually written about one project or another project, and often by the project leader or project member, and so it wasn't necessarily an objective kind of third-party treatment of this community. It was often more of an advocacy kind of treatment, and you know, some excellent work had been done in that regard, but it was, you know, it was what it was. So what we were hoping was that we could produce an objective and analytical study that had the kind of the sort of focus on organizational sustainability that characterizes a lot of our work generally, and also the sort of system-wide comparative perspective that also we try to bring to projects. So we had 2 goals. One was to fundamentally chronicle the development of some important projects, prominent projects, look at them comparatively to try to see what we could learn across them. But then I think I want to really emphasize this second point. This is not a project that was designed to sort of educate the courseware community or the online education community. It was a project that was designed to provide senior academic leadership, presidents and provosts, with strategic, with actionable intelligence that could help them understand this space and consider what it meant for their colleges and universities. So it's a very different kind of take on courseware than some will be familiar with. The core research question that we identified was that the value proposition of both traditional and online distance education is significantly different from the what has thus far largely been enrichment-only online courseware projects. And so, you know, recognizing that some members of the community see an opportunity to transform existing institutions and to build new kinds of universities based on courseware, we wanted to focus on what, sort of almost historically on what has happened to date. And so what we were curious when we looked at that question was, what do universities that sponsor and participate in courseware, that supply courseware, and what do the users that are associated with these projects actually get out of them? This was a very sort of fairly direct question. So, here were some of the sort of differences that we saw when we were trying to categorize what was a traditional degree program, what was an online degree program, what was online courseware. The key characteristic was that online courseware, as we defined it, were things that spoke to non-enrolled students and that didn't bear credit, at least didn't during the period that we were looking at them. And there could be instruction associated with them, but they could just be the publishing of course materials. And we were agnostic as to whether they would be fee-based or not. So in other words, they could charge a fee or not charge a fee. That wasn't the way that we defined the scope of the project. And so we received some support from the Hewlett Foundation. We hired just an outstanding research analyst named Taylor Walsh to actually conduct the project. She's since gone back to get a PhD from Harvard. And we initiated a fairly formal landscape review to select which cases in 2008 we wanted to look at. We ended up looking at fairly top-tier selective universities. That was where the bulk of activity, at least from our, frankly, our U.S. perspective, seemed to be at the time. And we took a comparative approach. We tried to find diversity geographically. We tried to find diversity in terms of public and private institutions, funding models, et cetera. And so following this landscape review, there was sort of a period of extensive literature review and then over 80 interviews, which featured not only project staff and leadership, but also the university presidents and provosts we were trying to understand what they thought strategically, if anything, their university was accomplishing through these projects. So the finished product is coming out in January. It's a book called Unlocking the Gates, How and Why Leading Universities Are Opening Up Access to Their Courses, and it's coming out from Princeton University Press. It is, I guess I should maybe pause for a second just to dwell in the open community on why did we choose to publish a book, right? Why didn't we just release it to our website or something like that? And we are going to release a version of the text to the website, so it will be openly available. But our objective was to make an impact, again, with provosts and presidents of universities, and we felt that the book still retains, the published printed book still retains value and is an indicator of the importance of a project in communicating to that kind of audience. And frankly, looking at the help that Princeton University Press has provided to us in terms of marketing, outreach, publicity, et cetera, editing, and the whole gamut, it really is interesting to see what kind of, where those values are added. So the case studies, I'll just run through them really quickly because I know I don't have too much time to. Is that book available for free download? It will be, yes, it will be. It will be released publicly in January. Is the publication date, and it will be available for free download from our website. Yeah. Of course, we'd love it if you would purchase it as well. That's the freemium model, right? The case studies that will be that the book treats are there's 7 of them. There's 2 that are bundled together. These early experiments of Fathom and AllLearn. Some of you may remember them. Maybe is there anyone who's even involved in one or more of them? AllLearn was a not-for-profit consortial effort that several major universities in the U.S. and the U.K. Constructed. Initially largely for their alumni communities. Fathom was a for-profit initiative that Columbia University led with a variety of other partners. They're both defunct today. They're both out of business. Some people say, well, they're out of business because they charge fees, and I'm willing to, that I think there's a hypothesis there, no question about it. You could also say they're defunct because they didn't offer credits, which is another way that some people have thought about them. But the point is that it was really as early as '99 when there was this sort of .com boom that was going on these are sort of 2 exemplars of a much broader set of initiatives that were taking place at that time, and we believe they provide actually vital context in understanding where this community of projects came from and how its values and sort of substance structure was shaped. So then, of course, no one will probably be shocked to find OpenCourseWare as one of the projects where we really looked at both its free aspects and its comprehensive aspects, and the way that MIT took what's probably not today well enough understood as great organizational risk in deciding to pursue the model that they did. We look at Carnegie Mellon, where with the Open Learning Initiative, they didn't just publish courses, but they also developed sort of very robust online learning environments that really actually deliver instruction to students, which I think is something that others are today beginning to build further on. Looking at Open Yale courses and how they chose quality over quantity, or at least that's how they present what they've done, and what that means from a branding, from a publicity perspective, perhaps from a strategic perspective, given some of the choices that they'll face going forward. Webcast.Berkeley, which was another video lecture capture initiative, similar in certain ways and predating the Yale initiative, but that was less focused on these sort of extremely expensive, extremely rich presentations, but more on the ability to serve their own student needs by capturing every lecture and having it up, that afternoon or the next day or something like that, and where the sort of community outside the campus was almost I don't want to say a secondary consideration, but not necessarily the primary initial consideration anyway. And I should say one that is a grassroots initiative, the only one here that didn't really start from an administrative leadership perspective. And then finally, and I think this is one that continues to really intrigue me, is the NPTEL initiative that comes out of the Indian Institutes of Technology, where it's a real, almost returning to the All Learn and Fathom roots of a consortial approach rather than a single institution brand-focused kind of approach, and where they really do see the possibility of connecting these projects to their project to online learning in the future, in perhaps something along the lines of what Carnegie Mellon has done. So some of the kinds of findings that the book explores are what their goals are and intended audiences are, their motivations, the impact, the way that they've tried to measure impact, the way that they've approached branding, which is a really interesting element comparatively across these. The ways that they have and have not approached sustainability and the sort of, what that may mean for the future. And then just generally speaking, overall, the organizational strategies that they've pursued and how, where this is part of a broader organizational commitment and where it's more of a grassroots effort, and how those kinds of things connect together. I thought I would just leave us with 5 minutes. Okay, so I thought I would just leave with some perhaps, I don't know how provocative these will be to this audience, but certainly some thoughts about what the implications are that we see anyway, looking across these projects. This is my suggestion that this is more than just a history project, but also actually I think of great value looking forward as well, because the kinds of implications that we were looking at. The book was finished right as the sort of fiscal context was becoming ever more clear for academia. As one U.S. university president suggested recently, what we have in higher education is what he calls a period of fiscal famine. And I think that is, given the, I think it's fair to say, unprecedented cuts in the UK that appear to be upcoming, the amount of cutting of higher education in the US among quite a number of state governments, the university endowments that are not expected to return to previous peaks for quite some time, for sure. There really is an environment of changed reality as compared with when many of the courseware projects we're familiar with today were founded. And so my proposition for you, and it's not my proposition, it's one that my colleagues and I hear again and again, is that universities either are or soon will seek to educate more students at least as effectively but at lower cost. And that's not just true for innovative online funky models that many of us here at the conference are experimenting with, but it's also true of some of the most traditional minded sort of quote unquote old fashioned universities that exist, and so I think that point is one that if it's right, if it's not just a fad, but if it actually is true over the course of time, that has real implications for courseware as transformative. Not just transformative as sort of open in the sense of we can reach beyond the gates of the university, which of course is where a lot of the energy around courseware has historically come from. But I would raise a question as to whether it could be not just helpful but even transformative for the traditional university sector, kind of turned back almost as a U-turn. So there is evidence that continues to emerge that well-designed, it's not cheap, but well-designed courseware can provide better or at least equivalently good, at least introductory instruction, at least to a certain set of courses. There is evidence that type of success can happen at lower instructional costs per degree that would be awarded. So in other words, that would have the implication of holding down costs. But I think even more importantly, it could allow faculty members to focus on the courses that they actually love to teach rather than the ones that they, and this is at least in a US context, rather than those that need instructors where faculty members are often obliged to teach. And I think that if you look at the interaction of those three advantages, and perhaps there are others, you might see the possibility of some kind of transformative opportunity coming out of courseware. Now, I think the key thing that we found from our project is that there's different kinds of media at play, there's different kinds of institutional contexts at play, and there's different kind of possibilities. And so I'm just sharing two of them here. One is the video lectures, where I think lecture capture has probably been, I would submit, underappreciated for its transformative implications or possibilities anyway. The idea of not just time shifting, but actually sharing course materials to the next semester and the next semester and the next semester, or to the next institution, the next institution, the next institution, I think is one that we haven't fully grappled with the sort of structural and strategic implications that could bring to bear. It was announced just a couple of months ago that NYU is going to be mounting a fairly ambitious lecture capture initiative. I don't mean to single them out exclusively, just one that I happen to be aware of. I think probably initially thinking that they're going to help their other campuses that they are running in other parts of the world, but I think there's probably other opportunities associated with that. And of course there's these learning environments, these adaptive or interactive learning environments like OLI that have received a lot of attention from the Obama administration, from the University of California, also in thinking about whether they can be rolled out at scale, so that it may be very expensive to create one of these on the basis of a single institution, but they might actually, if you amortize those costs or share those costs across dozens or hundreds or more institutions, that they might actually prove to be quite cost effective. We're doing some work to test in some detail the implications of some of these kinds of techniques and tools over the next couple of years. So, I just leave with a question about sustainability here now, not thinking about the sustainability of the universities, but now to turn back to the courseware initiatives themselves. I would argue, I would actually, I think we've heard some advocacy at this conference today so far about the role of government in funding courseware initiatives. I would submit that government may be a critical funding source, but by itself, it's a completely unreliable funding source. I think we're seeing real declines in the interest of government to fund university education in both the U.S. and the U.K. and perhaps elsewhere as well, where I'm less aware. And I think that's something that we need to bear in mind, that government funding goes up and down. And so I think that when you look at some of the kinds of projects that we studied, but I think this is true more broadly of other kinds of open projects, when you think about where they can look for support, there are real opportunities in some cases to look for support internally from the university that is their home. So, as a student service, for branding purposes, for community relations. There's an opportunity to look for external funding, to build an endowment, to build freemium models of one sort or another. But I think there's also an opportunity to become part of the instructional enterprise, either locally or looking more broadly from a system context, where where I think we're seeing real interest among policymakers and universities increasingly about using courseware as a means for transforming the traditional university sector. So anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to say about unlocking the gates and some of the implications that we see. And I hope you'll look for the book when it comes out and think about reading it. So thank you. And I have little takeaways for.
Thank you, Roger. Is there any question? Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious. The observation you made of the observation that the professors, scholars could teach the specialty courses that they would like, because it wasn't clear to me how that would be possible. Because I'm thinking of like the model when I was at university, which probably still exists, where the intro-level classes have 500 students, you have the main lecturer, and then the graduate students really do the one-on-one grading and that sort of stuff. Is that how that would work also online, where you would have the professional educator design the course, but then it would be graduate students who are administering the actual instruction aspect of it, especially for the big introductory classes? I wasn't sure how that actually works in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. The sort of how does this all happen? And I don't mean to suggest that it will happen or it should happen. I think that these are the kinds of possibilities that that some of the major public universities in the United States, at least, are beginning to grapple with. And I think that to take the particular example, you could imagine those kinds of those kinds of models developing. I think that actually beginning to dig into the structure of what that would look like is something that hasn't really happened too effectively yet. So there's a lot of cautionary notes here also. Those introductory lecture classes that anecdotally many professors don't enjoy teaching, they're actually the most efficient way that university education happens, right? Because there's great economies of scale associated with having 500 students in a classroom. So if you free up one faculty member who can then go teach a seminar for 25 people their sophomore year, their senior year or something, how does that? You've displaced 500 and you've served 25. So I think there's ways in which we don't necessarily have a structure that is perfectly apparent for that kind of case. But I think that these are the kinds of questions that are increasingly coming onto the table.
You set yourself up for my next question.
Okay.
Unlocking the gates, Ithaka is publishing, you're deciding, and I'd love to hear that discussion. Publishing a book, so you're really setting another gate in the time where everybody's looking for who we are and be easily accessible, share, mix and match and everything. I'd love to hear the philosophy behind it, why you're going ahead and your team has decided to publish a cover book.
Sure. Yeah. You may not have been here at the very beginning. I said very briefly that that we are making of the text available freely on the web.
I was here for that.
So what is your question? Why bother?
I just think it's contradicted. It's like kind of the same paradox. We have free resources, and they're difficult to find and contextualize and discover. So now we're putting a book on it, which is just kind of piling another piece on top of the barrel, and we're not making it any easier. And I think we're setting, in my opinion, to the community and the user who wants to use it, we're setting the wrong message.
So let me ask you a question. What would you have us do instead?
I make it strictly available in soft format, digital, rather than looking for a premium model, which in this context really is the old traditional publisher model, which you're supporting. And I guess that's my question. That's the challenge.
So in other words, even though many users will want to read it in print, will acquire it through traditional distribution models, etc., you would criticize us for making it available both ways. Is that what you're saying?
I think in the time and age, being in the community you're in, I think it's not necessarily the most conducive decision to have made in the context of moving the movement forward. Absolutely.
Well, so that's a fair critique. Our objective here wasn't to move the movement forward. Our objective was to conduct an objective analysis of the movement.
So rather, I'm just curious to hear some of the arguments. Is it because you said premium model?
No, I'm sorry. I was being facetious when I said that. The reality is that we, there's no money to be made publishing books through academic presses. That's not our objective here. The reasons why we wanted to publish this as a book was to reach senior academic leadership at colleges and universities. And we believed when we entered into the grant with Hewlett, and frankly, I still believe today that the best way to reach that audience is through a book that's gone through a peer review process, as this one has, and that has the sort of certification, if you like, of a prominent as possible a publisher. So I think that those in themselves still have value in the context of scholarly publishing. I think we wanted to make the book publicly available, broadly available, freely available. So we're doing that also. But I don't view. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble understanding the argument for why we shouldn't have
my argument
done
is only the
that.
hardcover book, because I think the review process, I have no issues with anything else. I think you're absolutely correct. But I think the argument from a university who's engaging in unlocking the gates to giving another in a traditionalist model, because we all know you have 20 teachers or educators in a room, 2 traditionalists, 18 revolutionaries. The 2 traditionalists today, they will suffice, and they will win in the setting, particularly in North America, I can tell you. And that's where I'm challenging more of the same, and I wish that more people would be different, more aggressive about it. And I think we're kind of giving the old traditionalist who's not willing to change and adopt OER, which is what this is all about, in a service component. We're giving them more of the same and saying, yeah, we're still right, because we still just do the book, and that's what they stay to. But challenging people in that manner, I think that's what it's time to do, rather than just continuing conversations.
Yeah.
And that's my wish for everybody, really, for the next 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate your perspective here, but I think the way that we have tended to operate in all of our projects has been to try to understand user needs today and to try to understand how they're likely to change in the foreseeable future. And when we look at as it were, and that I mean in terms of designing services and so forth, but when I look at provosts and presidents as our users, and not our only users, but as a principally intended user community for this project, it seems to me that in order to serve their needs, we needed to have that process as well as that output. And I don't think there was, I don't believe there's as good of a way to reach that audience, which I would maintain is still a critically important audience for all of us, whether we like it or not, without those kinds of communications mechanisms. So I appreciate your point, but that's how we've seen it.
That's a good debate.
Okay.
On 2 positions. Thank you. So we are stuck. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
We are stuck.